Drew Brees, a name I didn't think, if you had asked me last week, what are we going to be talking about? I don't even think Drew Brees would have been on my radar, but as Scott Van Pelt said, to welcome him to Monday Night Countdown, they were in California. They made a carefully placed call, and Drew Brees, I think, obviously accepts that when ESPN gives it to him. What did you make of Brees returning to the scene and his his debut on ESPN airwaves as part of the pregame show for Monday Night Football?
Definitely interesting. I kind of always figured Drew Brees' brief foray into sports media would be kind of a cautionary tale about how it's not as easy as everybody thinks, how it's not, something you retire one day and you wake up the next day and you're a broadcaster. There's actually a process. We saw Tom Brady take a year off after his retirement before getting in the Fox booth. We saw Greg Olson work his way up and, call XFL games before ultimately becoming Fox's top broadcaster. And it looked like Drew Brees was going to be one and done. And based on the reaction he got and the negative reviews, I don't think anybody would have blamed him, but it seems like he's done with the NBC family and he's kind of migrating over toward the ESPN family. And, obviously if there's anywhere where he could work out, I would think it would be ESPN, just because they do have so many roles that he could fill. I think that they're pretty smart about the positions that they put their talent in. And I think last night was kind of a soft launch of maybe Drew Brees' time at ESPN.
For sure. They have a much wider array. He did participate, obviously called that infamous Bengals-Raiders playoff game for NBC back in 2022. Never really got another shot calling a big game for the network, but was on the Football Night in America show here and there, and just eventually it petered out. He starts a YouTube channel. I went back and looked at that. He put like 10 videos on, and he's been consistent, though, regardless of all of that he wanted back in. And Andrew Marchand of The Athletic reports that this could be the start of something bigger with ESPN. I mean, it sounds like they had been eyeing him maybe even before that opportunity with NBC came along, and NBC just kind of beat them to the punch. Now they're getting their shot. But you mentioned that he could be, the versatility, the array of options for him at ESPN is maybe a good thing. I actually, watching him on the show, it's not that I think he was bad. I thought he was more than capable. He honestly was getting in and out and was very succinct and kind of keeping it moving in a way that I think is rare for guys, but maybe that Football Night in America experience helped. I think he almost has to be in a booth. Like, to me, calling a game, I know that sounds crazy if you watched that Bengals-Raiders game, because he was not well received. It did not work. He had a little bit of the Brady syndrome of just not really feeling the moment and feeling the energy of the game correctly. But it just feels like that's what his analysis is tailor-made for. He can take you into the mind of a quarterback. He wants to be in the weeds. He wants to be deep in a play, in a playbook, in a progression of this opened this up, that opened that up, this quarterback's thinking that. Like, it's not that it doesn't work, but when I'm watching, Ryan Clark and Jason Kelly and Swagoo chopping it up, having fun, Scott Van Pelt playing point, they're doing a different thing than Drew Brees is doing. And so he was good, but I think he's got to be in a booth.
I wonder if that's a matter of who he was paired with, because as you go through those names, he doesn't fit. But I could see him in a CBS NFL Today type of role, kind of like Matt Ryan's playing right now. But I do think you're right, ultimately, that because of his name and because of his credentials, I think he probably should be in a booth. It's just a question of, is he ready for it? Like, can you throw him back in a premium position? Because I don't know if he's a guy who's going to work his way up. I think if you have Drew Brees calling games, like, they have to be pretty, primetime spotlight games. I wonder, just as we talk this out, like, if because we're getting all these holiday games coming up, and I know the booths are set for Netflix, but if just this proliferation that we're starting to see, and I'm not even talking about necessarily this season, but moving forward, like, if you could get him in one of those Netflix booths, or if you could get him on an ESPN Plus exclusive overseas game, like, maybe that's a way where you can put him in a position where it feels like he's in a, a top broadcast booth without actually having to put him on Monday Night Football. And the other part of that equation would be there aren't any openings, right? That the with Chris Collinsworth re-signing at NBC and Troy Aikman set at ESPN and Tom Brady set at Fox and Tony Romo at CBS, like all the top jobs are taken right now.
It's fair. It's fair. I don't necessarily think that there is a job for him. Maybe this is just something where he does this show, maybe next year they bring him on in more of a full-time capacity. And then it's like the year after that, we finally really start talking about him, and the media landscape looks different. Maybe Netflix has bought a few more games over the course of a season or, whatever the case might be. We're already looking toward the next TV package at that point or something. But again, it's not a bad thing. The thing I wondered though is because I wanted to read this quote from him. He said I believe it was Front Office Sports was where this one. He's given versions of this quote all over the place in the couple of years since he left ESPN. He said or left NBC. He said, "I didn't really get the chance to broadcast NFL games, and that's what I feel like I'm most qualified to do. That's what I feel like I'm most passionate about. It's certainly where my knowledge base lies. Telling the story of the game, getting you inside the huddle, inside the quarterback's head, letting you know how we're attacking this defense. That, to me, is something I'd love to do down the road when the time is right." He kind of reminds me of Peyton Manning in his approach. Yes. Like, he kind of like, I mean this in a complimentary way, but he's sort of, he 3-step or 5-step drops his way into every answer. Where, like, if you listen to Peyton enough these days, even on the Manning cast or in interviews, you kind of have the script of how he's going to get himself into his talking points in your head if you've heard it enough times. And I haven't heard it enough times with Drew Brees, but the polish is there where I feel like he can do better than he did in that last one. And I wonder if he can, would he call college games? Would he step into the Robert Griffin role that he just got laid off from and kind of do some of those? And they're not going to be the biggest, but it gets him some reps. He's famous. He brings maybe some pizzazz to those games that they don't already have, and then he's waiting in the weeds. Is that a possibility? Do you think he would want to do that, or is that below a Drew Brees to step in and do like the third college football game?
Based on that quote you just gave, I think Drew Brees would think it's beneath him. I don't think it's beneath Drew Brees. I actually think that would be a really smart way to go about it. I mean, he's a college football legend. He held all the Big Ten passing records until, this explosion of offense the last few years, basically since Urban Meyer got to the Big Ten. I think it would make a lot of sense. It actually would have been a great fit at NBC, which holds the Big Ten's their secondary rights basically behind Fox. But It sounds like based on that comment, though, he wants to call NFL games. And so if he is going to pigeonhole himself as an NFL personality, I think that's really going to limit his options just because all of the top spots are taken. Even if let's say Tom Brady's one and done, like I've been predicting for months now, even if that were to come to fruition, like I would think Greg Olsen would just automatically get re-promoted back into that top spot. I don't know if Drew Brees leapfrog Greg Olsen. So it's interesting. I just went back and looked. Do you remember when Drew Brees' last NFL season was?
2019 or 2020?
It was 2020. That was further back than I would have anticipated. Like we're coming up on him getting enshrined in Canton here pretty soon.
That's true.
So I think that that would be interesting in and of itself, just because that will kind of reintroduce him, I think, to a lot of casual fans who haven't been keeping up with a lot of this. But I think that, so that means he was in the NBC booth in 2021. That kind of disastrous season, I guess. What's he been doing since?
I told you he started the YouTube channel. Yeah. I guess he was doing that for a bit. That was like last year. And then the last video was it really only did it for like 6 months, and he did maybe one a week. So, that didn't take up his time. I don't know. Maybe he's been kind of in the lab trying to get better at this stuff and just studying it. I don't really know. I think we've seen plenty of dudes who step in and are just good right away. I don't think Tom Brady would tell you it's just pure time doesn't just make you better. Tom Brady, no one could shut up about all the prep he was doing, and that didn't seem to give him any sort of head start. I think you sort of either have it or you don't. But yeah, I think with Brees, like the place that I kind of went is the worst This is what I thought. I want to throw it off of you. I don't know if it's true or not, because maybe I'm getting ahead of myself. I think Dan Orlovsky's a loser of ESPN welcoming him in here.
Yep.
You know, I think Robert Griffin getting laid off and Orlovsky continuing to call those number 2 games and being very front and center at ESPN, even if Brees is just kind of a sub-in or a part-timer on Monday Night Countdown, maybe makes some appearances on NFL Today or NFL Live, or whatever the case may be in the next 18 months or so, he's coming for Orlovsky's turf a little bit. Even if it's not at ESPN, there's a new guy in the mix, along with Olsen, who you mentioned, that is going to be on executives' minds as any of these positions become open.
It's funny you mentioned that, because just as we were talking about, the possibilities and the possible landing spots, my mind did kind of drift to, we're seeing it seems like half the weeks this year in the NFL schedule have Monday Night Football doubleheaders. And I know it's not that much. It's probably been, 4 or 5, if that. It's been at least 3 though, which is a increase from previous seasons. And so I think with stuff like that, you can kind of do the math. If they're experimenting with it more and more, it's probably only a matter of time until we have regular Monday Night Football doubleheaders on a more consistent basis. And if that's the case, then that opens up a new booth. And that does seem like a natural landing spot for somebody like Drew Brees. He obviously has way more name recognition than Dan Orlovsky. Dan Orlovsky's much better on camera at this point in his career, but I think you go inside the mind of an NFL executive, or I should say an ESPN executive. I'm guessing they're approaching it more like I approached our NFL media draft, where I take Tom Brady with the first pick. Then they're going to approach it like, hey, we really want to get rave reviews from Awful Announcing because Dan Orlovsky's doing great work in the booth. And so I do think the fact that it is ESPN, I don't think they're just bringing in Drew Brees to test run him because they happen to be in California. I do think that probably does say a lot, that they see an opening that they probably already have in mind. And I do wonder if that second Monday Night Football booth, if that becomes a more consistent thing, if that's what they're kind of targeting him for.
Yeah, because they have to know this is what he wants. His reps know this is what he wants. I mean, it's nice that they're bringing him into the mix, but when you see Andrew Marchand say that they've been thinking about this for a while, again, I just have a hard time believing that's for some kind of Jason Kelsey gig where he's doing, the pregame show and he's going to have a late night show next year. So like that's not why you bring Drew Brees in.